if we're going to aspire for some things from the West, then let's aspire for the good thing that they've also done. India is going through tremendous growth in consumption in the coming decade. If we don't watch what we're consuming, especially in terms of food, there could be a massive healthcare crisis in the country. We are, I believe, the diabetes capital of the world. I believe we have the highest incidence now of cancer, heart disease.
Plant-based rice also doesn't have enough protein. Is that true?
65 to 70% of people in the most advanced economy in the world, that's the United States of America, have chronic disease. Whether that's food, whether that's the kind of beauty products we wear, the kind of clothing we wear, the kinds of homes we choose to build, the kind of cities we choose to make. Everything is linked to.
It is often said that you're what you eat. If we go one step ahead, we can say that we are what we consume, be it food, content on Instagram, or even the people we spend time with. To go deeper into the pattern of consumption, I sat down with Nitin Dixit, the co-founder of Greenr, which is a plant-based restaurant chain and models in sustainable community living. We spoke about various topics, from the benefits of a plant-based diet to discussing the consumption trends in India to even how to lead a healthier life. And most importantly, the importance of community in bringing positive change. Stay tuned for an inspiring conversation. Presenting to you, Nitin Dixit. Before we start today's conversation, I've got one request. If you ever enjoyed the videos or found any value out of it, please subscribe to it. It really helps us as a channel to improve our content and bring better guests. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the video. Welcome, Nitin. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Shivam.
I would like to understand from you your vision behind Greenr and where did it start from?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, the idea of us starting Greenr was to encourage people to eat a healthier diet, which was not just good for them, but also good for the planet. And I think it was influenced a lot by my own time and also Mohit's time in the US, where we saw almost like a parallel sort of movement, consumer movement, which was around, plant-based, around healthy eating, around eating consciously for the planet. So I think it was those sort of broad themes that inspired us to start something in India as well, because in 2015, India was already starting to sort of boom in terms of the economy, and therefore consumption was on the rise. And generally what happens in emerging economies is that we tend to embrace certain sort of trends from overseas,
Right.
or from more developed parts of the world. And we tend to also embrace, certain things which may not be the best for us, whether it's processed food or junk food, or even, consuming things which perhaps are not the best for us. So yes, there are going to be all those companies that are coming into India, and we don't need to name them, but we said that there should also be an alternative to people who want to be more conscious about what they're consuming. And we felt that if we're going to aspire for some things from the West, then let's aspire for the good things that they've also done. And they've done a lot of good things in terms of health, especially in terms of plant-based, etc. So the reference was California, I think, which is one of the biggest melting pots in the planet, for not just for cultures, but also for food, etc. So we took that as a broad inspiration and made sort of California as an aspiration, but a positive aspiration towards healthier living, healthier eating, and being more conscious of the planet, encouraging a sense of community that wants to be more conscious, more sustainable. And those are the sort of themes around which Greenr is built. So it's not just a cafe, but we call it a community cafe, which is giving people space to explore alternate ways of living more consciously.
So you call Greenr a plant-based cafe, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, we call it a whole foods plant-based cafe because the idea is also to encourage a whole foods diet, or a diet which is minimally processed, ideally not processed at all. So, for example, we hardly bring anything into our kitchens which has a shelf life in terms of, or shelf life, which is sort of guaranteed through preservatives or stabilizers or any sort of chemical ingredients like that. We try to bring whole foods in, and then we process them manually in the kitchen. So they have a limited shelf life, which is sort of preserved through refrigeration. So it's just a few days and it gets consumed, and then we sort of make it again. So we want to encourage not just plant-based, but also whole foods and a minimally processed diet.
There's also a lot of misconception between veganism and plant-based.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is there a difference between it?
That's a very good point. So, of course, the vegan movement is very old. It's been around for a while, and the vegan movement discourages or any kind of consumption of any animal product, whether it's dairy is, of course, a common one, but even something like honey, because it comes from bees, is discouraged by a vegan diet. The plant-based movement is a little different. It came from a recognition in the industry, especially the food industry, that said that we need to define a broader way of encouraging plant-based consumption across the world. So plant-based is generally food that's coming from plant source, but you can have, let's say, dairy options, eggs, or even in some cases fish or chicken, but you have to clearly sort of label it on the menu that this is because it's coming from a non-plant source, right? So that's what the plant-based is. But if you are 100% plant-based cafe or restaurant or a product, then you would again become what they would call vegan. Right? So 100% plant-based is everything coming from a plant source only. But plant-based generally allows you some flexibility to have non-plant-based sources, very consciously sort of picked and clearly marked on either your menu or your food packaging.
So how has the Indian population, for that matter, because you said your inspiration is from a Californian kitchen, right? So how has the Indian population responded to a restaurant which is a plant-based restaurant?
Yeah, so I mean, look, the idea of plant-based as an industry is more from an industry perspective, right? But vegetarianism is not new to India, right? Veganism may be new to India, but vegetarianism is not new to India. Even if you look at it from an Ayurvedic perspective, even though Ayurveda has talked about meat consumption also at some point back in the history, but they did it in different contexts. I think in today's context, they would probably also advocate for a predominantly plant-based diet. But there has been huge value for ghee, for example, right? And there's a lot of studies now also that talk about the benefits of ghee. So vegetarianism is not new to India. In fact, India is the largest vegetarian country in the world, both in terms of percentages and in terms of absolute numbers. So, but what I think what we did different is, one, our focus wasn't necessarily on the Indian cuisine. It was more on what's called continental cuisine. So from a California perspective, that's sort of Californianized Italian food, Mediterranean food, Asian food, etc., and or even new American food from a California lens. But that's what was new. So even for vegetarians in India, it was something that they hadn't necessarily tasted before, or in that sort of form. So it was something we needed to make vegetarian cool again, right? Because vegetarian or vegan had sort of become very passé, and nobody stepped out to eat vegetarian. The cliche or the stereotype was that you step out to eat chicken and drink liquor, right? That's how you started a restaurant in Delhi or any other city. But that's what we tried to change, is sort of make vegetarian food more appealing through innovation. And also, of course, a strong focus on this idea of whole foods, unprocessed and plant-based diet. So plus the aspect of community as well. So people started to discover like-minded people, and they're like, this was a space for them to sort of know that they're not weird to have these types of beliefs, and they don't necessarily have to conform to the conventional mindset of consumption or go to a conventional cafe or restaurant. They could take refuge in a Greenr, for example. So I think we started to take that space in Delhi and then now in Bombay and Goa.
Wow.
So that's been our revolution, so to speak. But yeah.
And you plan to grow it further as well?
Yeah. So I mean, we like to say that.
What's your vision like for India?
We're a mission-based company. So for us, of course, as a business, you need to survive, you need to be profitable, and the profit sort of helps you to grow your mission. But we're not a profit-first company. And the profit happens because we've been very lucky to have tremendous support from people, and we live for our consumers, and we live for they're part of us. We're very community-driven, and we consider them our owners as well. So the vision is that India is going through tremendous growth in consumption today, has been, and that's why we started Greenr. But now, so especially in the coming decade, if we don't watch what we're consuming, especially in terms of food, there could be, and people will argue there already is, a massive healthcare crisis in the country. We've been discussing, we are, I believe, the diabetes capital of the world. I believe we have the highest incidence now of cancer, of heart disease. So these are not good signs. And this is without the larger country getting economically empowered, right? We're only still talking about the urban areas.
Right.
So imagine 70% of rural areas starting to consume a diet which may not be ideal for you. I mean, you're asking for trouble, no? So, and I think we should be transparent. And of course, I may be biased to say that we're promoting, of course, a unprocessed diet or a plant-based diet. But I think there's enough evidence now to support that there is a link between what you eat and your health. And I think in India, at least from an indigenous perspective, we've always maintained that. Not just in India, even the founders of Greek medicine, Hippocrates, would have said, let food be thy medicine. So even the origins of Western medicine say that food is medicine. Food is inexplicitly linked to the quality of your health. And therefore, we have to look at what we're eating. And I don't think anybody does that. You know, even my friends who are very aware tend to just consume, very, very sort of loosely.
Yeah.
And therefore, for us, our mission is that, look, at least for those people who wish to consume a whole foods diet, a plant-based diet, they should have that option in that city.
Right.
And we have even if it's not us, there could be others in this space doing it. We'll be very happy. But it's important that it happens as a country, because as we grow, if we don't do it, we will be in a much bigger health crisis than we are today in the next 5 years. And I don't personally think that the solution is just making more hospitals and more clinics. I don't think that might be good economically, but that's not necessarily a sign of a healthy population or a healthy economy, or what I'd like to think of as a conscious economy, right? So we have in India, we should at least make use of the ancient knowledge and wisdom that we have here. While we embrace a lot of positives from the West, we should sort of frame our own growth path in terms of the economy, in terms of what kind of industries we want to encourage for consumption. And for us, at least, that's the critical aspect of that is food, because that has a direct impact, not just on personal health, but also on planetary health, right? And so it all sort of gets linked.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It's all connected.
So if I were to think about all the problems a plant-based diet would solve, it will be on a level of an individual. It could be on a level of a society, or even the mindsets for that matter, in terms of animal cruelty, in terms of sustainability, 100%. In terms of your health, right? I want to start with the nutrition aspect of plant-based.
Yeah. Sure.
Do you get enough nutrition from eating a plant-based diet? Because that's the major question I would say that people would have before switching.
So nutrition is a very interesting thing. Nowadays, everyone's talking about nutrition, and as we should. But there are many layers of nutrition. I think there are a lot of conversations happening now around this. But you have to understand that fundamentally your food is coming from a seed, right? And that seed grows in a certain environment, which is the soil, right? And the quality of the soil affects the nutrition of that plant and that fruit, right? So it's very simple. right, in terms of how it's linked. But we have to look at that chain, right? So when we talk about nutrition, we talk about plant-based, we have to look at the seed. You cannot have a conversation about this without looking at the seed. And when I say the seed, see, in the last 50 years in India, and forgive my ignorance, but I believe there was a so-called green evolution. I moved to India 20 years ago, so I'm aware of these things through my own sort of experience. But there was some modification that happened to our original, what they call heirloom seeds, right? And the heirloom seeds would be the seeds which have existed in their natural form for centuries, if not thousands of years, right? These are seeds which were nourished by nature. They evolved, they're very resilient because they survived various sort of onslaughts of different nature cycles. Right. And so they pack a certain quality of nutrition, right? Which when we consume, we sort of take all of that in, and that empowers our health in ways we can't imagine. Now, nobody talks about this anymore, but heirloom is actually one of the most powerful ways of eating a nutritious diet, right? But even if you're eating, for example, organic, is the seed modified in any way, right? And if it's modified, is that diminishing the nutritional content in any way? Because you could have an organic environment for a seed, but if the seed is altered, you will still there will be still some question marks around the quality of nutrition that seed can ultimately offer the fruit or the vegetable that you're consuming. So for me, it's important to talk about the seed. It's important to talk about the soil. Right. Of course, ideally organic, but also ideally heirloom in terms of the seed. So an ideal plant-based diet would also encourage an organic sort of fruit or vegetable, and also unaltered seed, which has the resilience that's built into it by nature. Now, this is the ideal. If you can't have that, then at least having a whole food, sort of fresh fruit or vegetable is better than the ideal state that I was talking about, and not processing it, because the more you process it, the more you diminish the nutritional content of it, right? And so that's what we should be consuming. But I just wanted to describe to you the various sort of ideal sort of states of a plant or a vegetable. But can you get your full nutrition from it? Absolutely. I think today in fact, there's been documentaries which sort of really made the whole plant-based movement or the vegan movement much bigger than it was, let's say, a decade ago, because of the number of sort of high-performance athletes which are on a vegan diet. Right. In fact, some of our own sort of superstar athletes in this country have at some point talked about embracing a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. So this notion that a plant-based diet is somehow not going to give you enough nutrition is definitely a false notion. Some of the best performing athletes in the world are still on a plant-based diet. And nowadays, with the amount of supplements that you get, and again, you want to ideally minimize the amount of supplements and opt for a supplement which is, again, minimally processed. Right. But there are a lot of cleaner supplements available in the market that can give you your plant protein sort of daily requirement, or a higher requirement if you're trying to sort of add muscle mass, etc. So I think all those possibilities are there, but it's up to the consumer to choose consciously, read the labels, see whether the labels are transparent, look at the manufacturer, look at the intent of the manufacturer, and then consume those kinds of products.
On other chain of thought, which says that people also argue that they do not get enough B12, vitamin B12, and as well as plant-based diets also doesn't have enough protein. Is that true?
No, I mean, I think we just addressed the protein part. I mean, you have a lot of plant-based sources of proteins, whether there's lentils or beans or other types of pulses. But there's also a lot of plant protein companies, right, which are making proteins out of whether it's brown rice, whether it's green pea. The protein part is sort of well taken care of. The B12 part becomes a little bit more tricky there are some sources, a little bit more difficult to get that enough sort of B12 in through natural forms of diet. But now there's so many good companies which are making very clean B12 supplements. So they're easily available off the shelf and that can be added to your diet.
How is Greenr as a cafe answering to this question? Because I'm sure you get that a lot as well.
In terms of B12 or protein?
In terms of protein, in terms of a balanced diet, I would say.
Right. In terms of protein, so again, our approach to protein is, from the lens of whole foods, is all again through the lens of whole foods, plant-based. And we create simple proteins which are largely based on lentils or beans or pulses, and we sort of construct them in a whole manner. So our meals are sort of nutritionally balanced, but now we are offering certain companies plant proteins as a supplement in, let's say, smoothies, etc. So if someone wants to consume a high protein smoothie, they can easily get that through our cafes and in our menus. So that's how we're addressing it. But again, the B12 part is something, if that query comes to us, we generally refer them to companies who are making those kinds of supplements and which are fairly clean. So that's possible then.
So the nutrition aspect is covered by plant-based is what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't need to say that. You can ask some of the world-class athletes in the world who are on a plant-based diet and they're performing at the top of their game. Because you see, a plant-based diet, and this is their testimony, a lot of them tend to say that a plant-based diet also helps them to think clearer. So it's not just about the physical performance. It's also about the mental clarity when you're performing as a high performance athlete, right? So that enables them to function better physically as well, and move and coordinate in their sport. So Greenr doesn't need to say it. I think there's enough evidence around the world from the highest, some of the best performance athletes that it can work. So for most of us, it's not even an issue.
I'll shift our conversation from an individual perspective to more of a societal one.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about the climate change and sustainable development. How is plant-based beneficial for the sustainability of the planet?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's, people, obviously, there are people who argue against it, but I think there's a large consensus now that a plant-based diet is better for the planet. Because I believe it's the second largest emission of
methane.
Methane is from the livestock industry, right? And from the animal industry. So I think, and with consumption increasing around the world, it could also become the leading sort of contributor towards climate change. So I think there's no doubt today that a plant-based diet is better for you. The only question is some of the new companies which are coming up, from a health perspective, we would say that not just a plant-based diet, but I think processed plant-based diet may not necessarily be ideal. It may be okay from a planetary perspective, but we don't believe it's okay from a health perspective. For all the reasons that we've mentioned earlier in this conversation, that the quality of nutrition, what processed food or the addition of certain sort of chemicals to food can do to your system, to your health, to your mental health. I think there's more and more evidence now that suggests that that's not ideal. And a lot of people, and as Greenr in the last 10 years, we've seen so many people come up to us, right? So call it anecdotal evidence, but literally hundreds, if not thousands of people have shared with us in various testimonials that eating clean, eating plant-based has been transformational for them, right? From a perspective of not just physical health, but also mental health. But yes, from a climate change perspective, food and climate health are also intimately connected.
Right.
And that's the larger point, right? That we and the planet are not separate. Right? And unfortunately, our model of development and our model of economic growth has tried to de-link us and what we consume from the planet. And that's really silly because we're symbiotic creatures, right? On a very fundamental level. our existence or our coexistence with plant life, with animal life on this planet is that fragile sort of balance,
right?
That if it's maintained well, we thrive. And not just we thrive, we can't be as the most empowered and so-called intelligent species. We also have to consider, we have to think about the well-being of not just plant life, but also animal life, and the well-being of the entire planet. So it's really, it's time if we are serious about talking about climate change, that we start talking about food. And not just food, we start talking about consumption, right? And the nature of consumption, whether that's food, whether that's the kind of beauty products we wear, the kind of clothing we wear, the kinds of homes we choose to build, the kinds of cities we choose to make. Everything is linked to climate change. And it's also linked not just to our health, but the health of plant and animal life on this planet.
Right.
So we have to make that choice today as humanity. Do we want to live forever in glass cocoons, isolated from the rest of this beautiful planet, and then eventually opt for a ticket to Mars? Or do we want to live and thrive with other life on this planet? Now, this is maybe sounding esoteric, but it's a very fundamental biological reality, right? Even if you don't get philosophical about it. But we don't talk about it. It doesn't reflect in our basic consumption. And I think in a very, very small way, that's what we're trying to do in terms of our mission, is to support more conscious consumption. Because that is the key to bringing a shift in the planet.
Right. If Nitin had to solve one problem in this world, what would that be?
Conscious consumption. Very simple. It would change and impact not just the nature of the economies that we choose to build, but the nature of politics on the planet. The consumer has tremendous power, and I don't think they realize the power. I know we're going through an election cycle right now, so everyone talks about the power of the vote, which is, of course, very powerful. But I would say the biggest power you have is the power to choose what you want to consume.
Absolutely.
And that starts with your food, that starts with everything. And that decision has profound impact on everything. It has impact on whether you are empowering a war in this planet, it's whether you're empowering peace on this planet. We're not isolated creatures, right? We have this power within us. And I don't blame any of the corporates. I don't blame politicians, but I question ourselves and myself personally all the time, that what kind of choices am I making on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, and what kind of impact does that have? But I've spent a good amount of time in the US. I grew up there, and I've seen big pockets throughout the US, entire cities where there's large pockets of sort of conscious people, and it's a very different reality than what we see today, right? So it's already happening.
How do you cultivate such people, though? How do you cultivate these populations of people who want to make more conscious decisions?
You can't cultivate. It's an individual. Every individual has a free will. They have a choice. What you can do through your own actions is to perhaps inspire, to motivate, to educate, to make aware.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do as individuals at Greenr, and as Greenr as a company, and not just us. And I don't want this to be about Greenr. There's a lot of companies in India that have similar missions, right? And that's the beauty of what's also happening in this country. And not just companies, farmers, right? Lots of them were reviving heirloom, reviving ancient sort of practices. So this is a beautiful movement, right? Which is very intimately tied to the planet,
right?
Which is already happening. And what the consumer can do is make better consumption choices to empower that, right? It's very simple. And I think if we were to do that, you would see more and more activity, because ultimately then the economic stimulus will kick in, and you would see more farmers and more producers creating those kinds of products.
Yeah.
And more communities popping up, right? creating different kinds of eco-habitats, different types of ways of living, which is, by the way, is already happening in India in certain parts. Yeah, in smaller pockets. It's already happening. But again, going back to what we do as consumers, what do you empower, right? And so I would just say that let this be an opportunity for consumers to pause, think, because we tend to complain that there's a war going on somewhere, and we don't even hear of all the wars and conflicts in the planet. We only hear what the mainstream media decides to focus on, right? And of course, that's wrong wherever it's happening in the world. But there's tremendous conflict happening in the world today, and I would say all of it is related to the choices that we're making as consumers. And I know that sounds like a big statement, but it's true.
It is true.
Because
not just what you consume to eat, but also what you read,
everything,
or who you elect as a leader. What kind of products do you buy? Everything is connected to the consumerism at the end.
So it has to do. You see, human beings are very powerful creatures, right?
Right.
We can be fearful. We can be loving. We have both these dichotomies, or both these poles within us.
Yeah.
And every moment we get to choose how we act on something. We can act fearfully. We can act from a place of love, right? And then there's a whole range of values associated with these two poles, right? And living consciously, or consuming consciously, or being conscious beings is constantly just making those choices.
Yeah.
Right? And those choices have a tsunami of an impact when you look at it collectively. That's all I want to say.
Because that's the only difference there is between us as humans and other beings, that we are conscious. And we need to utilize that in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were speaking about this earlier in the context of India's own history and the independence movement and the freedom movement. One of the most powerful things that Gandhiji had done, which a lot of people say may have been a turning point towards our independence movement, was his sort of push towards self-reliance and sort of stopping the consumption of what the imperialist powers were selling us, which was because that was the way they were empowering themselves.
Absolutely.
And then subjugating us. So that's there, he's the one who said, be the change that you want to see in the world. That's our conversation, right? That is living consciously. That is making conscious choices every moment, right? And maybe it sounds like a big responsibility, and I don't want to sort of scare people.
But you're only responsible for yourself.
Yeah, just do. And the irony is these choices are better for you, right? Because even if you look at it from a perspective of survival, if we have a planet which is thriving and we have flourishing flora and fauna and biodiversity, there's no doubt that we'll be more empowered as biological beings, right? Our health and our longevity will increase. So even if you just purely look at it selfishly, it's a sensible decision, right, to be conscious. And so, I don't think that's something anyone, if you just look at it even with a little bit of intelligence, you'll see that it's the only thing that any sensible human being would do.
Connecting this to Greenr again, you spoke about how Greenr tries to imbibe a community.
Sure.
And what are you doing at the moment in terms of raising consciousness for consumers as a community?
Yeah, well, we're just, at the end of the day, we are still a cafe. So what we can do as a cafe is, again, create spaces, right? Spaces of solace, comfort, exploration.
Right.
And we've done now, a lot of events, right? Maybe thousands of events through our 6 cafes. And a lot of these events are around some aspect of conscious consumption, right? Could be sustainable clothing swaps. It could be something on clean beauty. It could be anything.
Ayurvedic medicine, for that matter.
There's a range of sort of topics around this theme, and we're very open to experts coming and using our space to do these workshops, do these events, allowing our community to sort of come together. But you're absolutely right. Community is an absolute critical part of this change or this shift. Because if there's other spaces and other places where people can get together,
Mm-hmm.
then that critical momentum builds, right?
Right.
One individual versus groups and communities of people mobilizing change is obviously much more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it needs to happen, not just at Greenr, but we need literally thousands of these brands across the world, encouraging community action towards conscious ways of living.
Right.
And that's, I think, also a very positive way of bringing change, because it's a silent sort of revolution or a silent change where things just change and everyone responds, right?
Mm-hmm.
The companies, the politicians, they're forced to respond. They have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's a possibility which is very real today, very, very real today. We're literally at a critical junction for humanity, and I know every maybe generation says that.
Right.
But given the amount of technology that's prevalent on the planet, if that technology gets empowered this way, it can cause very quick destruction. If it gets empowered this way, it can rapidly just turn things around in a
Right.
positive way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of thinking consciously or thinking of, with awareness of what we're doing will also have profound impact on the way we utilize technology. And in the age of AI, that becomes extremely relevant, right?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of technological advancement happening around us.
Sure.
How can we improve our eating habits with the technology that is coming up, and there is a lot of possibilities of using AI in calculating your micros or macros, for instance. Where else do you see that we can improve our eating habits with technology?
So again, AI can also just feed in on the information that already exists on these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the information that's there right now is still not complete, right? Even modern medicine hasn't fully made the correlation between what is an ideal diet and, let's say, disease, right? So we have to understand that what may be good for us superficially in terms of our immediate health may still be causing deeper damage to us in terms of our, imbalances within, right? Mm-hmm. And that could be yielding longer-term lifestyle diseases and chronic diseases. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that we shouldn't be completely reliant just on information, because the information, if it was complete even today, right, we would have very, very healthy people, right? But that's not a reality, right? I think 65 to 70% of people in the most advanced economy in the world, if that's the United States of America, mm-hmm, have chronic disease. Why is that? Right?
Because of the eating habits, for one.
Right? Mm-hmm. So, I think the information is maybe there, but we have to still tell the AI that this is what I'm looking for. And we also have to know that there are other sources of information which you still have to feed the machine, you still have to feed that sort of learning modules, right? Which are derived more from our ancient wisdom, whether it's Ayurveda, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, or other sort of indigenous systems of medicine, which looked, I believe, this is my personal opinion, that looked at life more holistically. They understood the human biology from a causal sort of, from a causal perspective, right? So the layers of humanity, not just the physical part of it. So the impact of our energy and our mental, mm-hmm, or the mind field and the mind and the body. So all of these things and how they correlate, there's a whole wisdom and science to that. I would hope that someday that also feeds the machine learning or the AI sort of things. And then I think the suggestions or the recommendations that AI will give us could be very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. But I think that process is yet to happen because we still don't have consensus between traditional medicine or indigenous medicine and what's so-called modern medicine, right? And I'm saying so-called modern medicine because it varies. Whether you call it allopathy or whatever the West is advocating.
Right.
But there needs to be a little bit more integration, I feel, mm-hmm, between the two. And when that happens, then I think the AI will come out with some really powerful results. But I think this will happen hopefully in the next 5-10 years.
So Greenr doesn't just advocate for you are what you eat, but it also says you are what you consume, is what
100%. Absolutely. And that's one message I can sort of leave, is that look at yourself and look at the power that you have to influence change, far-reaching change, beyond what you can ever imagine. And that has directly everything to do with the rupee or the GPay or whatever you use to make that sort of consumption decision. And I would encourage more people to do that because it will have profound consequences for planetary well-being.
So all we can do is start a dialogue, talk about it, inspire through action.
Absolutely. More conversations. It's already happening, but much more needs to happen. And hopefully conversations like this and others that are happening in this space will motivate people to look for more information, to gather around with their communities and work in this direction, because I think I believe it's the only way towards a real progressive future. Progress should include all of life in the planet, not just human life.
Wow. I didn't expect us to talk about human consciousness while you're talking about plant-based diet today, but
everything is interlinked.
Absolutely.
And interconnected.
This has been an inspiring conversation with you.
Thank you so much.
But before we go, I ask my guests 2 very personal questions.
Yeah.
One would be that what is one piece of advice you would give to a younger Nitin?
I think I've always been somewhat, pondered upon existence and why am I here? And so when you tend to have those kinds of big questions in your head, you tend to make decisions sometimes which are not very practical in terms of. So I think a lot of young people today that I see are going through a bit of a crisis. What they're doing in their life doesn't necessarily match their inner calling. And so I would say be practical, because, it's getting increasingly difficult to survive economically on this planet. Our population is increasing. So the inner calling is beautiful. Follow the inner calling, but be practical about how you transition your life from where you are today to where you want to be. Allow that transition period to happen, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, so that you can balance your sort of some amount of personal comfort with your longer term sort of life goal. Or
could you add a context to it so I would understand that better?
I think the sense of a lot of people, at least we see, even at Greenr, or I come across personally, people are not satisfied with their work. So they may be making good money, but they don't want to get up in the morning to go to work. So the so-called midlife crisis is happening now with people in their early 20s, in their mid 20s, in their late 20s. And people want to shift to doing something drastically different. But it's not a very easy world out there, right? In terms of survival. So I would say, bring whatever you're doing in life, bring more consciousness to that. I'll just take a very mundane example, but if you're a makeup artist, and you're using lots of toxic beauty products with lots of questionable chemicals, switch to cleaner sort of beauty products.
Absolutely.
With minimal chemicals. Switch to lighter, more subtle sort of makeup, which empowers more of a person's natural beauty. So every aspect of life, every aspect of consumption, even from the most mundane to the most, can be done more consciously and with more conscious intent. So for people wanting to sort of answer their inner calling, I think if they just do that, I think a lot of people will be able to find a balance between survival, material comfort, and living purposefully, right? Living a sort of mission-oriented life.
Right.
So that's what I would say, because that's been my journey. But I did it sort of in this very wild form, threw away my old life.
But that teaches you, life
ended up
as well.
in an ashram, did all that and sort of found my way back in the world and sort of struggled and then sort of slowly found my way back. But people don't necessarily need to do that. They can find a balance between that, their sort of family situations, their communities. So the transition is a little easier for themselves, for their families, for their societies. And, that can happen a little bit easier.
Beautiful. That's a great way to, relearn things and get your passion as well as soon as possible.
Passion and purpose.
Since our podcast is called Diary of a Publisher, I would like to ask you another question that revolves around a book. Is there any particular book that you wish you would have read earlier in life?
Oh, wow. So this is a fault of mine. I wish I would have read more. I've hardly read any book ever. Even if I start reading a book, usually after a few chapters, I end up putting it down. Somehow just doesn't keep my interest. It's a fault. I admit it. I should read more. But I think a book cover I came across very early in my life as a teenager, I think had some impact on me. And the book was called The Road Less Traveled. And I think I read that book through the cover, and I think it's been my life, and I don't have any regrets.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This conversation has been really insightful for me, and in terms of not just eating right, but also consuming right. I appreciate you for this, and I hope the audience had a lot to take away from it as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nitin. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed the episode or got some value out of it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until then, keep reimagining yourself and know that the power of change lies within you.